Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about multi-step equations today. So we have a couple of examples that I'm going to go into first to just review one and two-step equations. So for one-step equations, we know that we're looking at inverse operations. So let's say I've got 5n equals 10. What I recognize is that between the 5 and the n, there's multiplication happening. And so I need to undo that multiplication because I'm trying to isolate my variable, which is my n right now. So what's the opposite of timesing by 5? Well, it's going to be dividing by 5. Because what this does is this reduces the other 5. Both of those, we say it cancels out, but it becomes a 1, and 1 times n is just n. Now what I do to one side, I have to do to the other, right? So n equals 10 divided by 5 is 2. And so that's one-step equations. We're just finding the inverse operation that solves for the variable, that isolates the variable. So let's try a different example. If we have 5n plus 2 equals 17. So this is an example of a two-step equation. So normally we would circle the variable. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle the whole term that contains my variable. What I've said before is that the 5 is very stuck to the n, and the plus 2 is not very stuck to the n. So I'm going to deal with that plus 2 before I deal with the 5n that's really stuck together. Another way that you can think about this is that we're doing the order of operations in reverse. So if we do, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and we would normally deal with our parentheses first. This time, since we're solving for two steps, we're going to start with our last step, which is addition and subtraction. So we're going to undo our addition and subtraction before we undo our multiplication and division. And that's going to happen 98% of the time. So the way that we're going to solve this one, whichever way you look at it, whether you're looking at the reverse of order of operations or whether you're looking at isolating your variable, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. So what that does, that becomes a 0. We don't have to write the 0, and we've got 5n equals 15. And we can divide both sides by 5, because that's the opposite of multiplying by 5. This becomes a 1, n is by itself, n equals 15 divided by 5 is 3. So that's two-step equations. Not so bad, right? You just want to undo that addition and multiplication, or that addition and subtraction before you undo the multiplication and division. So let's take an example of a multi-step equation. So there are two different types of examples I'm going to use. An example like this has all the variables on one side. And then we're going to do some examples of variables on two sides, on both sides. The only thing that you're going to do that's different is you're going to simplify your expressions. You're going to simplify both sides before you solve for your variable. So this goes back to combining like terms. I can combine my 5n and my 5n because they have the same what? Think about it. In order to combine like terms, I need two things to be the same. They need to have the same letter or same variable. And if you write these down somewhere, that'll be really handy for the test. And it needs to be the same power or the same exponent. So that's really important whenever you're talking about combining like terms, whenever things are added and subtracted together. For multiplication and division, it doesn't really matter. But when you're adding and subtracting things, when you're combining like terms, they have to be the same letter to the same power. Okay, so I know that my 5n's both have the same letter and the same exponent, the same power. So let's actually add them together. 5n and 5n smashed together is going to make 10n. I still have the plus 6 because that hasn't changed, equals negative 14. So now I'm going to circle my term that contains my variable, because now it's just a two-step equation, right? We simplified it, So now let's finish. We're going to subtract 6 from both sides. That's 10n equals negative 20. Now between the 10 and the n, that's multiplication, so I'm going to divide because that's its opposite. And you get n equals negative 2. Excuse me. So multi-step equations, the only extra step is that we're simplifying things. If you need to, go back and watch this again. Please make sure that you're following along on your own paper. If you haven't done that yet, you might want to try it because that's a good form of participation that will encourage learning. So let's move on to an example of variables on both sides.